This episode is brought to you by Mortgage Workflow Partners and the Mastering Encompass series, both for users as well as administrators. You can find out all the information about it over at masteringencompass.com. Also, if you'd like to check out what we're doing on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe to the channel using the @MasteringEncompass handle. And make sure you stay up to date on all the information, not just with podcasts, but also video content that we bring to you as often as possible. Now let's get on to the episode. Howdy, 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 howdy. Larry Bailey, Mortgage Workflow Partners. As we are letting folks in, thanks everybody for coming. Today's Tuesday, 4 p.m. Eastern. We get together as a community in the Mastering Encompass community. We're going to talk about all kinds of things today. Most importantly, we're going to talk about the initial disclosure and processing preparation. This is number 4 out of our 12-part series. And we're going to be going through basically how to take native Encompass and how to build your perfect magical company that doesn't exist, and how do we leverage native Encompass to make it run. We are going to give it a couple of minutes as we're waiting for some people to join. And so a couple of ground rules. First of all, it's a community meeting, right? So your involvement is everything. And what that means in plain language is that if you have any questions, as you have questions, you can use the chat. You can raise your hand, ask questions. If you want me to take you off of mute, because everybody's muted and the cameras are shut off when you show up, kind of keeps us safe from the trolley trolls out there doing all kinds of stupid stuff with our meetings, but feel free to ask questions as we go through. For those that are on audio only, I have no idea how to give you the ability to go off of mute, but if there's a way, I'm sure you'll figure it out. All right, so big announcement. Before we get going into today's event, I am proud to say we launched our book. Workflow Before Technology. It's my very first book. Sorry if it sucks. I did my best. But the idea is, I'm totally lowering the bar, right? The idea is everything that I've been teaching companies how to basically do their workflow reviews, how to document their workflows, strategies, and most importantly, the value, right? The value of actually going through and documenting your workflow and what you do with it. It's all in here. I pull a lot of real life reports and use cases and examples from places like Stratmore and Acrolis, among just to name those two, because those are the first two that come to mind. But basically, you know, MBA, also some studies from the MBA. And I've been talking about this forever, but it's actually pretty awesome to put all this in writing and to put it out there. First version, we'll see if there's a second edition as we learn more things. But this is really, obviously, I talk a lot about Encompass. It's why we're here. But this is practical for any mortgage company. Again, for those that don't know, I spent the first 20 years of my career in retail lending. I then went to work for Ellie Mae as an implementation project manager. And I realized that nobody has their workflow documented. Like nobody. Out of in 18 months, I got 0 documented workflows from every company coming from another LOS or a brand new company being created into Encompass. And so that's why it's been a critical goal for me, is to not only do this, which is what we do a lot within Mortgage Workflow Partners, but then also train you how to do it yourself. And so inside the book, if you buy it, whether it's Kindle or paperback, within the resources of the first chapter, there's a private link that goes to a PDF. It's a workbook PDF that you'll find on mortgageworkflowpartners.com. And it goes hand in hand with the book to kind of guide you through each chapter. So enjoy. Love to hear your feedback. There you go. So we'll go on to our regularly scheduled agenda. For those that are just joining, thanks very much. We are just about to start our segment into launch ready, initial disclosures and processing prep. As a reminder, This series is all about taking my magical mortgage company, which doesn't exist, and I'm guiding you through how am I leveraging Encompass desktop and Encompass web and Encompass web settings to really define what you should be doing and what I would recommend that you do with your organization to move forward. And the reason why this is really important is because the industry is always changing, Encompass is always changing. I got the benefit of getting a sneak peek from ICE last week with regards to what actually 25.3 is looking like when it comes out to web here in about 3.5 weeks, right? 2 weeks? I don't know, August 9th, whatever that is. And then also what does 25.4 look like? And then also what can we squeeze into 26.1? In a nutshell, super awesome. Yes, I'm an Encompass geek, but most importantly, the things that are coming out to Encompass Web from ICE in terms of the UI elements, completely off the chart awesome for me as a workflow specialist, because it allows me to leverage enhanced conditions in the web UI in meaningful ways that we can't do today. And then really awesome is the workflow task UI and the structural changes that you'll start to see in 25.3. It's going to progress in 25.4. And I think what you're going to find is it's going to amplify the use cases in every company for how to leverage workflow tasks, even if you're not using Encompass Web, but you still want to document workflow tasks, whether you're using Encompass Desktop or you are using the Encompass Web pipeline, task pipeline, but you're doing the work in desktop. Totally fine. Again, the magic word here, the drinking game, is interoperability. If you got something to drink, drink. That just basically means, remember, it's one loan file. It's two separate interfaces. And what matters is that you're using the appropriate interface at the appropriate moment in your workflow with the appropriate team. It's all about being appropriate. So let's talk about initial disclosures and let's talk about what happened. Just as a reminder, last week we talked about we got the application into Encompass and we did some initial document requests, right? That was last week. Now we've got to prep for initial disclosures and we've got to prep this file for processing. So I want to talk to you about a couple of things that I've done successfully and launched, and I'll show you in our Mortgage Workflow Partners Encompass ICE environment. And because I want to explain what's going on here. So first of all, when I go through and I've got my team working, remember, here's the concept, initial disclosures, right? So there's three ways to do initial disclosures. Manual, which is probably what you're doing now. Automated, which is lights out, meaning somebody did something, they saved and exited the loan, and then the robots did their things. Or one click. Now, show of hands, was anybody who's here today, was anybody in the crowd at ICE in Vegas in March when I talked about one-click automated disclosures? I'm just curious if anybody was here during that event. So it was me on stage, Danielle was there, Lisa. Cool. Did you, sure, okay, cool. So we got a bunch of people. Did anybody do at least one-click disclosures yet? Anybody in the audience today? Has anybody actually pulled off one-click automated disclosures? Not yet. Oh wait, Chris Davis, my man. Chris, just curious. I don't know if you want to put it in chat, but are you doing both? Are you doing fully automated, or are you simply doing one click? Let me know in the chat if you don't mind. And so what's really important to understand is the way that you get there in terms of initial disclosure. Both. Okay, so they're doing both. Thank you, Chris. Appreciate the insight. Which I would, and I don't know if company, I want the ability to do both because maybe the file is getting ready for disclosures lights out. maybe the services that I need to have run are being run lights out, or maybe they're being run manually, right? So what's the deal? The other part that distinguishes between lights out initial disclosures and one click is, does the person who's activating that action want to be in the file to make sure other things are happening? And this really depends on your workflow, which is why workflow is so important. So as an example, if I want to come over and go over into my, did I not keep it? I guess I didn't keep it, whatever. If I want to go over into my favorite file of enhanced conditions on web, the thing that I like to do for my sales team, now remember, where are we, right? We went for application, we sent out the borrower doc request automatically through workflow rules, and now we're at initial disclosure. And what we're doing is we're making sure that the file is disclosure ready. So I did some work for a client, and they tasked me to unwind another company, a third-party company's automated initial disclosure process. So the first thing you've got to do when you figure that out is you've got to figure out, well, how do we know when the file's ready for disclosures? Anybody have a disclosure desk? Right? Does anybody have that? And so if you have a disclosure desk, that means that somebody needs to know what it takes to make sure the file is ready for disclosures. Guys, document it. Make them answer a survey, video them, follow them, do whatever to figure out what they're doing, because probably they don't need to do that on every single file. Do you need a disclosure desk for some loans? Yes, I believe in that. It could be a one-off situation for a particular loan program, or it could be that you need to get like a refi authorization worked out in your itemization, which can't really be automated. But let's be fair, the overwhelming majority of loans are probably able to be done through some level of what you see on screen here. Now, anybody love custom fields like me? If I had to go to a deserted island on how to configure Encompass, I might pick some business rules, but I got to take with me custom fields. And part of the reason why, and I'll explain later on today, is I can make a custom field do almost anything if I know what I need it to do. Easy said, right? So in here, I've got all of these custom fields, which, by the way, I have this exact same input form on desktop. Feel free to copy this. This is okay. This is not proprietary. This is just, it's just there. And so what I did was I went through and I discovered, what do I really care about from my disclosure desk, which is how I created this. I sat down with the disclosure team and I said, what do we care about? And they said, oh, well, we look at number of borrowers and we look at blah, 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 like all this stuff. And in each of these custom fields, I went through and wrote simple custom field calc to say, if there's nothing in field 65, aka the social, fail it. Now, some people don't like this because you feel like there's a lot of back and forth, and there's theories and methodologies of how to also then use workflow tasks instead of milestone field requirements, which you can also do. But there's an idea of how to constructively notify what's missing. And sometimes there's too much conditionality in that request, which is why I created this. And so just as a reminder, in case you've never seen this, in case you need to find field 65 on the web, you can simply go there, click it, it'll bring you down, it'll refocus your frame and also highlight it in yellow and let you know, it's missing, right? And so if I fill in this information and I go back into my quick wall and I go back over into my disclosure ready, you'll see 65 is now cleared, but now I've got the LE due date, right? Or LE date, whatever that thing is. So the idea here is you need to be able to, when you get through that initial disclosure, like launch, getting ready to send out initial disclosures, I'm sure what Chris found as well as we did, and Chris, keep me honest, but you had to discover, how do you make the file disclosure ready in order to get it automated, right? True statement. I'm sure if anybody gave it some thought, you'd agree. So then how do we get that? How do we do this? Like, how does it actually work? If you haven't done this before, it might seem really crazy like developer stuff, but it's not. So just as a reminder, I'm going to go ahead and save changes. Just as a reminder, thanks, Chris, for the honest check here. So when we go through, as a reminder, everything's going to be pretty much in workflow rules. Now, I can tell you that for getting a file ready for disclosures, if you're using a checklist or your disclosure team is using a checklist, I would highly encourage that you leverage workflow tasks and you create this concept of for disclosure. I don't think I have one because that would have been too cool for me to get ready for this meeting. But if I've got send disclosures, it'd be really cool if I had a bunch of subtasks in there that are conditionally fired if that information is missing. And this is where you get into this construct of why does a task exist? If a task is related to a document fetch or a field fetch, you could use tasks, but quite honestly, you might find it better to do it in other ways, whether it's in that custom field calc example I gave, or in a milestone requirement if you're using milestones to send disclosures. But if you're like most, disclosures are in between milestone events. You don't need a disclosure milestone to indicate that work. Sometimes it sits between files started and sent to processing, whatever those two whatever that milestone is for you. And so my point is that you can create these within these main tasks. Of course, you can create these subtasks. And when you go down and create these subtasks, right? So we'll just call this as a test subtask and test on here. And we'll go ahead and save. Now, as we create these subtasks, remember that in your workflow rules, when you go and create your workflow rules to find stuff, you've always got this ability to create the subtask here. And when you create the subtask, you can create the condition for which that subtask fires. And here's a little bit of a twist of a UI that's coming down the pipeline from ICE is right now you've got reopen completed tasks to create subtasks. They're going to jiggle this a little bit and they're going to make it even more intuitive to allow you to open the main task, which opens subtasks the other way. So if you're finding it problematic for opening subtasks one at a time, and your workflow isn't quite working out well, keep an eye on the 25.3 release happening here. When it comes out to production, you can come in here and obviously read the release notes. I'll be doing another reshoot of the release notes when they're published. So you can use your tasks and subtasks to get through your idea of what's missing on a file. This is where it gets interesting because your resulting action, of course, can be in that sending out the initial disclosures. And here's where I want to make sure that everybody's on the same page. So when we come over and if I can go slowly enough, send disclosures, thank you. So remember, we've got nested actions on this. I want to make sure you guys don't forget that. And again, I don't know if Chris, you use this. Let me know let everybody know if you do. But basically, what do we do if the system goes or the user goes to click the one-click initial disclosure package to go out and it fails? What do? Do you create a task for that to have somebody go follow up? Probably. Do you send a notification that, hey, that the disclosures failed to go out? Probably. But on completion, what do? You could do a task to go fetch the initial disclosures. You could also send out a notification like, hey, the disclosures went out for the Smith deal, FYI. Firstly, what I'm going to tell you to do is start a scheduler. And the scheduler I'm going to encourage you to use is the one that says, whatever your SLA is for your borrower to get those disclosures back to you. Okay, so what I've done in this setup for you is to say, listen, as we go through getting that file ready for disclosures, we've also got this outcome. Now, if part of your workflow is before that file is disclosure ready, right? You want to make sure that you go and automatically order a service. So make sure that, again, as you go through when you're ordering a service, you've got to configure that automation first. I talked about this in the workflow review and somewhere in the community, but I fell into this trap early last year when automated services first came out. What I did was, all right, tell me if you haven't done this. I went in and I created a new automated service, right? Automation rules. And I created the automation for whatever, whether it was closing fees or ordering credit. Another one that I did was upfront ordering. I think it was fraud. I think those are the only ones that we talked about up front. And you always want to use the workflow engine. Please do not use ASO bot. As a reminder, this ASO bot supposedly is going to disappear sooner or later. And you should make sure all of your ASO bot rules are moved to workflow engine unless you've been told directly from ICE otherwise. So in any event, getting that file ready for those initial disclosures, you can use automated services so your team doesn't have to go manually do it. And then when you get into, and you obviously do that with workflow rules, and then when you've got the workflow rules, you can use one-click action, which, remember, as a one-click action, what are you doing? You're just simply going in and adding a triggering event for a field value to be modified, whatever your custom field is. And then you're going to add the conditional statement of what that value of that custom field is. Okay, so Chris did something similar, mainly on fails to alert a group of folks to go figure it out. Probably your old disclosure desk. So in here, one thing that's changing in 25.3 is this, right? So if we go and make 3152, right now it says any change. This is a big change in 25.3 to give us as admins the ability to customize this part of the change instead of having to do it over here. So a little bit of a UI update. Keep your eye on that. Candace is excited. Candace, I think they heard you and they want to make you happy. So I'm glad you're happy. All right. So we've got this, let's go back to the topic. We're getting this file ready for disclosures. I've shown you what we're doing inside of a file. I'll go back to that just to reinforce. We're a loan officer, presumably. We've done the hard part, which is to get the borrower to say yes. We've created the file. We've either gone through and either manually ran services or we've had services running in the background for us automatically. I would ask you to always keep pressure on your vendors, on your service vendors, to make sure they're using the limited lock functionality within the new APIs, so that if you have automated services running in the background, that information is just updating in the background. It's what we want. And I've seen some folks also take this initial disclosure review and also list out services. So you've got services here. Again, I just gave a simple example. Shout out to Lodestar, who's got a great free service that you could try out. Yeah, John, I'm going to credit Bill Packer for introducing me to that phrase, and I'm sure he got it from somewhere else. So don't give me any credit for that one. Or smart fees, closing corp, whatever you want to do. Over here is Mavent. So as an alert here also, or as making sure Mavent's coming out with a new set of rules that you can pull into additional fields to individualize the result. So for your non-QM folks, right, you don't want it to pay attention to ATR QM. Don't use the overall result. Use the aggregate of the others that you do want to check. This is, again, another reason why I love custom fields, because I can do whatever I need to do to meet the workflow. Workflow first. All right. So we get the disclosures out. Anybody using automatic retrieval? I'm going to stop sharing for just a second because I got to bring something up on screen, and it's a production system, and I don't want to do that. Candace, so the calc behind any one of those fields are looking for valid results. Yeah, that's right. You got it. Share screen and going back to sharing screen. So if we go down to our doc setup and we go to e-disclosure packages, I hope everyone who is using Consumer Connect. I'm going to make sure I don't save that change. I hope you're doing auto retrieve. Guys, if you, as a reminder, if you do not see auto retrieve down here, that means you are not using new doc viewer. If you're using new doc viewer, even if you're using a different POS, you should be using auto retrieve unless you don't want to. And that's for documents being uploaded, documents going into the unassigned, or faxed or scanned. So scanning is a big deal for those that even if you're using everything outside of Encompass, some other platform, but you've got scanners, auto retrieve. Chris is an auto retrieve raving fan. I am too, by the way. So what this means in plain language is every time the borrower e-signs something, it's uploaded. Every time a document is requested automatically through workflow rules, there you go, John. But every time it's automatically sent out as a request, and we're going to talk about more detail about how to prep a file for processing. This is how you make sure it's uploaded. Now, remember, really important to talk about that when you're doing retrieval, a lot of operations teams don't really understand that the retrieval goes into the thing that was requested. So in English, if you allow a borrower to upload into unassigned, it will. That can be helpful, and it can also be extra work. What we really want to have happen is you're making document requests from the borrower directly into the document that you're requesting, right? And so I'm just stopping sharing for a second. So again, I can take this off screen because it's a production. Lisa asked, is the after section necessary? Only if you want it to stop. So Lisa, that after section is when do you want it to stop? Good examples of this would be if you don't want auto retrieval after funding, which is what you saw on screen, because that particular lender wanted to get an alert that there was an update and they wanted to go manually do it. Their call. What am I going to do? I can only do so much. That was their call. So you got it. Okay. So let's go back into workflow rules, because I want to talk about getting the file. The disclosures are out. The borrower's gotten their notification template, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But how do we make sure that what the borrower is receiving is what you want them to do something about? And I'm going to talk to you about the differences between conditions and documents. It's important to remember that to a borrower, a document to us is a task to them. A workflow task to us has nothing to do with a borrower task. Zero. Borrower task is I need something from you, aka a document. If you have your document requests going out to your borrower, if they're tied to a condition, which hopefully they are, and you have automated enhanced conditions in your file, there is so much you can do with getting that file straight from the borrower into your underwriter. For all you wholesale folks out there and all you correspondent, all your TPO folks out there, what's the magic brass ring? To go straight from TPO straight to the underwriter to get cleared, so you buy that loan quicker, so you close that loan quicker. Retail, there's no difference. And where we usually kind of tense up is, I don't want, who knows what the borrower uploaded? Why do I want that to go to my underwriter? I want it to go to my processor first to review. And if you've got that, that's fine. That's totally fine. But what I'm going to suggest here is that where most companies fall down is when they get into a workflow rule and the triggering event is whatever they want, and the result is the request send documents. Remember that when you do this, you pick your pair, right? I'm going to pick all borrowers just for the sake of it. But when you go through your documents, e-folder attachment is sending. Okay, so use cases for this could be a PDF that is loaded into a document, like an appraisal, preliminary title, I don't know, whatever else you want. If it says standard, that means that you're making a document request. So a good example of this is if we are making a document request for a 1003 gang, what do you think is going to happen? Encompass is going to send the borrower a notification template, which we'll talk about in a minute, because I'm going to talk to you about how to deal with this. One template, multiple uses, and how I work this out into my getting my file ready for my processing team without having to go through a lot of heavy lifting with dynamically created workflows. It's important to remember that when you're requesting a standard or you're requesting a needed, and I'm going to try and find a custom. God help me. Well, that was dumb. Let me try that again. So we got standard, we've got needed, and somewhere down here I've got custom. Well, I'm not going to waste your time. Let's just pretend one of these says custom, okay? If it's standard or custom, which is what's mapped in your desktop settings, that's going to be a request from the borrower, and it's going to take the standard print form or the custom print form with however you configured it or it's pre-configured, and it's going to deliver that to the borrower for them to review, acknowledge, and return. What are some great use cases, gang, when you want to do a request? I talked about this last time, and that's like a welcome letter. And this talked about automating the e-consent. Hopefully you watched the replay. If you haven't, please go do it. You'll see it in the resources in the community. But when you request a document from a borrower with an e-signature sticker on it, that reconfirms their e-consent, first of all. Second of all, it gives them something to do on the site. And then lastly, it requires them to acknowledge it and then return it. If I want something from them, such as a bank statement, like let's pretend I need a bank statement, it shows up as a task. And so what you can do is if I want this to go out, let's pretend this is the list. I can choose whatever advanced condition that gives me this document request. So let's pretend this is a standard deal. And then I want to come over here and I want to do a request, and I want to have this one go out to all borrowers, and I'm going to get a list. Maybe this is just a non-QM deal, right? Maybe it's an FHA loan. Maybe it's a VA where I need VA documents. Guys, this is how you build your best processing file dynamically within one rule. And if you structure it correctly, you could put all of your FHA requests together, all your VA requests together. You get the picture. All your purchase requests together, all your refi requests together. Sean says, so for instance, I can auto send an attached appraisal, and yes. And Sean, in that example, what do we all get trapped on, right? The trap is, how do we get the field to show up in the desktop, showing that field, the initial disclosure, the initial appraisal has been sent to the borrower, right? It's a standard field. You can't update it through here. So what you can do is update a custom field that then uses a field trigger to update the standard field to whatever date you want, right? So you can be clever about it. First appraisal sent, that's the field, Sean, yeah. But yes, you can do it. If you send the appraisal and then request, if you send the appraisal and then the next one in here is a custom, pretend it says custom, that will guide you. So Candace says the field isn't enough for most investors. Candace, real quick, tell me what most investors need to show proof that you've delivered the appraisal to the borrower. I know, it's an acknowledgement that the borrower has received that appraisal, a signed doc. So what can you do? You can request a custom print form with an e-signature on it that says, hey, I've received the appraisal, automatic, in that same set that Sean gave you. Investors will accept that because it's been e-signed. And guess what? You can create a workflow task that shows that that's still outstanding if it's not yet received in the e folder, because you set up automatic retrieval because you requested it. And when the borrower e-signs it, it automatically goes in the e folder, which then finishes the workflow task of needing that in the e folder. Telling you guys, I can go all day, and I intend to go throughout the entire workflow, walking you through step by step. So how does all this tie into processing prep? Wait, Candace, right, but it was difficult to send appraisal itself. It sounds like they're finally going to allow for that. Yeah, no sweat. No sweat. Let's slow it down. So Candace, first of all, when you go to send, so if I were to send, let's pretend that it's another, it's another, sorry, I had some Celsius, so I'm probably talking fast. So let's pretend that this one says, you know, when the appraisal is, if we go to write the condition, I'll use this, by the way. I don't trust myself free typing. So what I'll do is I'll go to virtual fields and I'll go document date received and I'll hit apply and I'll pick appraisal, right? So when the appraisal apply, and I'll do is non-empty date field apply, and I'll grab this syntax and I'll go put it in the result for over here. So that's my trigger, right? My trigger event is something that's maybe this is a standalone rule, but I'm gonna, when this is true, my recipients are going to be all borrowers. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to send them the appraisal. Okay, making sense so far, right? So that's the appraisal. Now to meet Sean's requirement, Sean, it's okay. So now, Sean, you want to send out the appraisal acknowledgement. I know this doesn't say appraisal, but pretend it does. I want it to say standard or custom. Pretend, oh my God, Larry. Pretend that says custom and pretend this says acknowledgement of receipt of appraisal. Click apply. So what's going to happen is your custom print form that's tied to the acknowledgement of receipt of appraisal will go out to the borrower as a request. This will go out as a file being sent. And on that request is an e-signature that requires the borrower to e-sign. And then when they do that, because you've got auto retrieval set up, like we went over a few minutes ago, it will automatically come into the e folder. And you can use that if you can use either this process to update that standard field through a custom field calc, or you can use some other method depending on how you want to manage it. Carrie says, I'm wondering about this too. In desktop, we couldn't request on settlement service type because we thought we were trying to order it. Yeah, you're not making a request here. You're doing a send file. So, yeah. So I don't. Yeah. I think what was going on, I think what you guys are finding is that you were trying to use the appraisal document in non-workflow rules environments to be able to send it out. And because it was a service document, desktop settings were limiting that possibility. Yeah, in web, we don't have that problem. We can use this all day long. And this is why I wanted to bring this up today in this conversation, because when we're prepping the loan for processing, you know, next session we're going to be talking about pre-underwriting workflow secrets, and what I'm going to be sharing with you is how is the processor prepping the file through to get that file ready for pre-underwriting. You know, this concept of one-touch underwriting is used to be like the standard. We would want the processor to get that file ready for the underwriter. So the first time it went to the underwriter, the file basically is cleared, short of any, you know, things that you couldn't get at the time, like, you know, whatever, homeowners insurance or updated appraisal or who knows what, some nonsense. But when we're prepping this file for processing, what I want you to take away from today is I'm leveraging workflow rules to make these document requests intuitive based upon the data in the file. And what's important to understand is it's not just here. I'm also leveraging workflow tasks to make sure that I've got my sales team or my loan officer assistant team to make sure they know what they have to get done to make that file ready for my processor to pick it up. Now, in my magical mortgage company that doesn't exist. All right, Sean, are we still talking about appraisal, by the way? So remember, appraisal is either, so if we go back to this rule, I just want to make sure we're clear on this. When you go to have a result to send or request in here, and we go over to documents, I'm going to go down to like appraisal because we've been talking about this. It's going to be an e-folder attachment or needed. There is no such thing as a customer standard print form to an appraisal. It just doesn't exist. Another good example would be title, right? So if we went down to title, I got a lot of documents in here. Sorry, gang. Let's see, title report. Same thing. So service documents are not standard or custom. That's not a thing. Service documents either have an attachment or we need them. Okay. You would never do a needed to a borrower unless they were providing it to you, which again might seem kind of weird. But anyway, all right. So let's go back over to tasks. What I want you to take away from here is the task types are going to be changing dynamically from ICE. And this is an interesting situation. So where we have enhanced condition types that talk about managing the sources and recipients and categories and who can clear and which status exists and which role can manage which status, that's enhanced condition type. With current task types, remember, this is where you have persona-based, not role-based, but persona-based activities to the task type. Today, when you go to see all tasks, there's a gap, right? And more importantly, you could actually see more than you need to or not see the ones that you're trying to see. And what we're going to be delivered here from ICE is the ability to aggregate specific tasks into specific types that are then served up in an all tasks view. And you will only be able to see the tasks that you can see within the loans that you can see. Why is this important? This is important because forget about you. Maybe you're a super admin, you can see everything. But let's talk about your teams that you're supporting. And let's talk about maybe there's a processor team that you want to have a bunch of tasks automatically assigned to the processor that they need to manage accordingly. Who don't we want to see those processor tasks, right? Probably closing, post-closing, somebody like that, secondary. So the idea here is that when we are working through our workflow tasks, I want you to start to think about these task types perhaps in new ways. I know for me it's new. I'm not just thinking about the kind of task, which is how I originally took this setting. It's now going to be morphing into who is going to be managing this task and how do I want to group those tasks into something meaningful. For me, and when I talk about this file, I'm getting this file initial disclosures out, and then also getting it prepped for processing. I want to make sure I've got my LO and LOA tasks created in a way that makes sense when the file starts or when critical data gets updated in the file that they need to go chase down, i.e. 1172, loan type changes to VA after the loan's created. I got a whole bunch of tasks I want them to go chase. Now, I also have workflow rules that are going to go spit out a bunch of doc requests from the borrower if I want. But all the while, I've got my ongoing task list of getting that file ready for processing, not only through workflow tasks, but also through the input form I showed you earlier about disclosure eligibility. What if you riffed on that and you got the file for processing eligibility? Maybe you've got a workflow in your company that talks about how the file has to be ready for processing based upon data validation issues or e-folder document consistency or services being run or disclosures being returned with ITP being logged properly, right? So when you're talking about tasks, when you've got like something like the e-disclosures were returned, well, that doesn't automatically update ITP. So maybe they've got a task to go update the ITP to make sure that's the deal the borrower actually wants to go through. Candace asks in chat, so we could set it up so that more than one processor can see the task for a given file. That's correct. So what they're going to have is in the task pipeline, just to kind of let you know what's going down very soon. You're going to see in here, you've got tasks, and we're going to see your tasks, or I think it says my tasks and all tasks in the same UI here. It's kind of down here. And the all tasks are going to be the tasks of the loans that you can see. So this helps segregate organizational structures, whether it's company-based or branch-based or whatever, right? Think about user groups. So hopefully you've been leveraging user groups to properly display or hide loan files, and you're not using organizational hierarchy or organization/users, I hope. If you're stuck in the problem of using organization/users to display loans that they're not supposed to see, it's going to come right back to you when tasks get updated to show all tasks, because they're going to see a whole bunch of tasks on there for loans that they're not supposed to see. So, so gang, if on this topic, I know that, I presume you guys are always on top of all your settings. If there's anything that I can ever do or mortgage workflow partners can ever do to assist you to prepare with any of this stuff, just please reach out. I've been, for those that have been, I've known this forever, right? And I want to make sure that you know what's going on and getting ready for this. It's the whole reason why I'm doing this whole workshop, is to tell you how would I create a company today and have you align with those ideals with reality of your company. And when I got to this topic, what I wanted to prepare you for was how to deal with initial disclosures, both with one click and file readiness for one click, and then potentially true automated. And then as importantly, there is a ton of work that goes in to preparing that file for processing. For retail, those are easy words to understand. For non-retail, what about a file getting ready to go into underwriting? Or what about a file being accepted by your company, right? These are all things that you can think about on how you're going to manage that workflow. But I'm always going to suggest that when we come in here, not only are we leveraging workflow tasks and the custom input form for file readiness. I showed you the disclosure readiness, but it could be file readiness. But please leverage your workflow rules and understand how these things are working. Test accordingly, and always, always, always check to make sure that you're going through. So if you're going through and running, I don't think I've done any services in here. It's probably going to be empty. Oh, 2 successes. That's pretty cool. So we had a file started, tests and CoreLogic automated flood. So please make sure that you're using your automation audit check here. One last thing I'll remind you about is if you pull up an GUID here, right, that doesn't have curly brackets, which is totally fine. But if you pull the GUID from desktop and you're pulling it back over in here, search by loan GUID, please make sure when you paste, make sure you make sure you remove any curlies on the end. Otherwise, it'll come back empty. Okay, so if I did this, obviously it'll give me a hit because I've used it. But make sure if you come up with empty and you're like frustrated, make sure you don't have any curlies on either end of that GUID. So for today, that's where I want to leave you. I hope this has been helpful for getting those files ready into processing. Before we go, any final questions? Does anybody want me to take them off mute? If you want to talk through something, we've got about 5 minutes left open here for the end. And certainly anybody watching on replay, add any questions in the replay post, and I'll answer accordingly. Cool, Chris. Chris, if you're still on here, did I leave anything out that you would do different? And if Chris, you're not on here, I should have asked you sooner. Sorry. In any event, oh, you're here, Chris. Anything that you would? What's your biggest? If you could go back in time, what's your biggest fail story that you would share with the group? So effectively, if you could have done anything over again for either one-click initial disclosure or automated initial disclosures, what would you have done differently? I'll give you. I'll talk over while you're typing that out, if you don't mind. I can tell you for me, what we found is there was a complete misunderstanding from the business for what was a file eligible for disclosures versus a file they wanted to disclose. And so what I typically found was the company, the client, the companies would argue over a file that was perfectly fine to disclose versus a file that they felt comfortable disclosing. Chris says EDS and custom doc issues they're into because they're just complex. So you had some custom docs not populating properly, and your packages weren't coming out properly when you went to automatically request them. Yeah. So don't get complicated like Chris, and you'll be fine. I think that's the moral of the story here. Awesome. You guys are great for coming to this. I hope that this has been helpful. And yeah, and I hope if you end up picking up the book, I'd love your feedback, good, bad, or indifferent. Let me know if we hit the mark with that. And I'd love to see your work sometime. If you have any questions about how to figure something out in workflow, let me know. Okay, thank you, Candace, for ordering your copy. You're super awesome. You guys have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you out there. Good luck. Bye for now.